Good morning, class.
गुड मॉर्निंग सर।
Good morning. तो आज हम लोग जो इम्पोर्टेंस को पढ़ रहे थे उसको हम लोग कंटिन्यू करेंगे और we were focusing we need to complete three more importance of capital structure, जिसमें पहला था minimization of cost of capital, उसके बाद मेरे ख्याल से पांचवा था सॉल्वेंसी और लिक्विडिटी पोजीशन और लास्ट में था फ्लेक्सिबिलिटी। यही था ना अभिजीत, इफ आई एम राइट?
यस सर।
ठीक है, तो हम लोग शुरुआत करते हैं पहले वाले पॉइंट से, मिनिमाइजेशन ऑफ कॉस्ट ऑफ कैपिटल। देखिए, आई हैव रिपीटेडली टोल्ड यू दैट एनी कैपिटल और एनी मनी व्हिच इज गोइंग टू बी इंजेक्टेड इन अ बिजनेस हैज सम कॉस्ट, be it in the form of opportunity cost or whatever. ठीक है, but the fact is whenever there is some capital induction in a business or a proposed project, that capital will incur a cost. ठीक है, that cost may be more or cost may be less. Now, once the capital structure is being designed, you need to ensure that the cost is being minimized. Why? Because once the cost gets minimized, the return to the shareholders, so the profit which the company is making is maximized. Minimization of cost will mean maximization of profit, and maximization of profit will mean higher EPS. Higher EPS will mean higher prices of the shares of of that particular company. And secondly, when you talk about more profits or higher profits will imply that the company will be in a position to make payments more in terms of dividends or bonuses. So that will go on to increase the wealth of the shareholders. Ultimately, the entire objective of financial management is to bring about the maximization of shareholders' wealth. And another important aspect is once the company is assured about its revenue or its cash flows or its business model, then it can afford to have more of debt in the capital structure in comparison to equity. Now, why I'm saying this? Because it is considered that cost of debt is lower than the cost of equity or cost of preference shares. Again, there is a logic behind it, because once you are raising debt, it's a loan, and the interest payable on loan is a deductible expense and can be shown or is shown as expense at the debit side of profit loss account. Once the interest payment is being shown at the debit side of the profit loss account, the net profit of the business falls or is reduced, which will ultimately reduce the tax liability of the business. The tax liability. Therefore, the that part of the finance which is being expected to be injected into a project which has a debt component will carry a lower cost, and because of that lower cost, we can increase our profit or the shareholders' wealth, right? The next point is solvency or liquidity position. Once you're designing the capital structure, you will have to also ensure that the liquidity position of the business is kept intact. Now, when I'm saying liquidity or solvency position, liquidity refers to short-term solvency position, whether the business is in a position to pay off its short-term liabilities or not. That is the current liabilities. And generally, the principle is that the current liability needs to be settled out of the current assets. And what is solvency? Solvency refers to long-term liquidity position of a business. Long-term liquidity position of a business. Now, what about long-term liquidity position? Long-term means in the long term, whether the company is able to retire or the company is able to pay off its principals or interest on timely basis or not. So once you have more of debt in your capital structure, and payment of interest and payment of installments on due dates is a compulsory, irrespective whether the company is making sufficient profits or not. So in that case, what is going to happen that it will put an undue pressure on the company management to pay off the interest even under circumstances where there is slowdown, where there is lull period of the business, where the business is facing problem in terms of generating revenues. So under those circumstances, those compulsory payments or cash outflows will put extra burden on the business and might lead to the insolvency of a business or of a firm. Therefore, capital structure will also help you or also helps an organization in keeping a balance between equity and debt, right? The last one is flexibility. Flexibility refers to what? Flexibility means something which can be adjusted accordingly to your your uh, financial position. The capital structure needs to be flexible. It provides flexibility to the firm. How it provides flexibility to the firm? Say, for example, if you have sufficient cash in hand or cash equivalents or other assets from which you can repay your debt, then uh, you can pay it off. And once the debts are being paid off, it will reduce the interest burden. It will reduce the interest burden increase the increase the good solvency position or sound solvency of the business. Now, when I say flexible, flexible does not mean only in terms of debt. Rather, uh, over the years, what I have seen is if the company is rich in cash and cash equivalents, it finds itself in a position of buying back its own shares from the open market. So buying back of the shares from the open market will do what? It will reduce the share capital, the number of floating shares in the market, and once the number of floating shares in the market is reduced, what will happen? It will increase the EPS, it will increase the EPS, and increased EPS will lead to increase in the market price of the shares and again contributing in the shareholders' wealth. Now, another aspect to this is once the buyback of the shares is being done, the company will have to pay this amount of profits or will have to distribute the amount of profits, available profits among lesser number of shares. And lesser number of shares में जब आप dividend को distribute करेंगे तो profits को distribute करेंगे तो the amount of dividend will go up. The amount of dividend will go up. So ultimately the idea is to benefit the shareholders of the business. So these were some of the importances of capital structure or designing or having a good capital structure. Am I clear, class?
Yes, sir.
ठीक है. Now write down another topic: determinants of capital structure. Determinants of capital structure. Determinants of capital structure. The following points. The following points determine the mix of various sources. Determine the mix of various sources of finance also known as capital structure. Also known as capital structure. Number one, risk of cash insolvency. risk of cash insolvency. लिखिएगा risk of cash insolvency, risk of cash insolvency, risk of cash insolvency arises due to failure, arises due to failure to pay fixed interest liabilities, fixed interest liabilities, full stop. Generally, the higher proportion of debt in capital structure, generally, the higher proportion of debt in capital structure forces the company to pay higher rate of interest, forces the company to pay higher rate of interest on debt, on debt
Sir, to pay
higher to pay higher rate of interest, to pay higher rate of interest on debt, on debt irrespective of the fact that, irrespective of the fact that the fund is available or not, the fund is available or not, full stop. The non-payment of interest charges, the non-payment of interest charges, the non-payment of interest charges and principal amount and principal PAL है and principal amount in time will warrant WARRANT will warrant the liquidation of the company, will warrant the liquidation of the company, full stop. The sudden withdrawal of debt funds from the company, the sudden withdrawal of debt funds from the company can bring about cash insolvency, can bring about cash, the sudden withdrawal of debt funds from the company can bring about cash insolvency, cash insolvency, full stop. This risk factor has an important bearing. This risk factor has an important bearing. Bearing का मतलब effect. BEARING. Bearing effect in determining.
Sir, this risk factor has
an important bearing. BEARING. Bearing का मतलब effect. Bearing in determining the capital structure of a company capital structure of a company, and it can be avoided, and it can be avoided if the project is financed by the issue of equity shares, is financed by the issue of equity shares. एक बार इसको पढ़ के देखिएगा, मेरे ख्याल से बहुत सिंपल है, इसके ऊपर हम लोग बात कर चुके हैं। अगर समझ में आ रहा है तो देखिए, एक बार पढ़िए। पॉइंट क्लियर है क्या?
Sir, debt irrespective of the fact.
Debt is
Irrespective of the fact
पूरा सेंटेंस पढ़ो ना, आगे पढ़ो।
that the एक मिनट सर, generally the higher proportion in debt capital structure forces the company to pay higher rate of interest on debt irrespective of the fact that the fund is available or not.
ठीक तो है। जैसे सपोज करो कि रोल नंबर 12 है, ये एक बिजनेस कर रहा है 100 रुपए लगा के। उस 100 रुपए में इसने 60 रुपए लोन लिया हुआ है, और 40 रुपए इसने क्या किया कि अपना लगाया। अब क्या हो रहा है कि इसको 10 रुपए और चाहिए बिजनेस चलाने के लिए, इसके पास पैसा है नहीं। रोल नंबर 12 ने क्या किया कि और बोरोइंग्स करने का सोचा, और डेट लेने का सोचा। तो जिससे डेट लेने का सोच रहा है वो रोल नंबर 12 के बिजनेस के बैलेंस शीट को देखेगा ना। वो तो बोलेगा भैया ये तो 100 रुपए में से 60 रुपए कर्ज लेके धंधा चला रहा है, 10 रुपए और लोन लेने के लिए आ गया। यानी कि अब 110 रुपए के कैपिटल में इसने 70 रुपए का तो लोन ही ले रखा है। तो अगर मैं इसको लोन दूंगा तो मेरा पैसा वापस आएगा नहीं आएगा इसकी गारंटी नहीं है। तो जो मैं बीइंग द लेंडर, मेरा रिस्क प्रोफाइल क्या हो जाता है, बढ़ जाता है। तो जब बीइंग अ लेंडर मेरा रिस्क बढ़ जाएगा तो मैं आपसे ज्यादा इंटरेस्ट चार्ज करूंगा। अगर तुम दे पाने की स्थिति में हो तो ठीक है, तुम लो हमसे, और अगर नहीं दे पाने की स्थिति में हो तो तुम्हारा बैलेंस शीट देख के, क्योंकि तुम्हारे पास डेट ज्यादा है तो हम तुमको लोन नहीं देंगे। सिंपल। तो वही लिख रहा है कि अगर आपके कैपिटल स्ट्रक्चर में डेट कंपोनेंट ज्यादा है, तो डेट कंपोनेंट ज्यादा होने का मतलब क्या हो गया कि अब आपको फ्रेश डेट लेना है तो आपको इंटरेस्ट रेट ज्यादा पे करना पड़ेगा। इस बात से कोई मतलब नहीं है कि आपके पास कैश है या नहीं है। कैश होता तो भी आपको हायर इंटरेस्ट देना पड़ता, क्योंकि ज्यादा डेट होगा तो रिस्क ज्यादा है, रिस्क ज्यादा है तो इंटरेस्ट ज्यादा चाहिए, रिटर्न ज्यादा चाहिए। समझ गए?
Yes sir.
और बताओ, मतलब सारा पॉइंट समझ में आ गया पूरा? पॉइंट नंबर 1, और कहीं कोई दिक्कत है इसमें?
सर वारंट।
यहाँ पे वारंट का मतलब होता है रिक्वायर्ड। यहाँ पे वारंट का मतलब होता है रिक्वायर्ड, चाहिए, नीड। Is it done, class? बढ़े आगे?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
ठीक है. Next point, point number 2, risk in variations of earning. Risk in variation of earning. देखो ये पॉइंट बड़ा सिंपल है, इसको इसको समझने में कोई दिक्कत नहीं होनी चाहिए. मैं इसको एक्सप्लेन करता हूँ पहले. सपोज करो कि यू आर प्लानिंग टू इन्वेस्ट इन अ प्रोजेक्ट, यू आर प्लानिंग टू इन्वेस्ट इन अ project, and by seeing your competitors, by seeing your competitors and historical performances of the industry, what you are observing is कि the type of business in which you are investing, there is no problem of earning, there is no problem of revenue. Okay, the business model is stable, the revenue is stable, the cash inflow is stable. There is no issue as far as earning is concerned. Once you have sufficient cash flow, once you're having good revenue inflow, there is no risk as far as business is concerned. Then you will be in a better position to pay off the interest liability, fixed interest burden. Right? So under those businesses, under those projects which have a sound earning, a stable earning, there is no risk whether the business is going to generate revenue or not, whether the business is going to generate sufficient cash inflow or not. In those circumstances, you can afford to have a larger proportion of debt in your capital structure. Right? On the other hand, the project in which you are expecting to invest, in which you are expecting to deploy your money, there the earnings are unstable. Unstable means then again you will ask, sir, if the earning is unstable, then why shall we invest? Unstable earnings का मतलब ये हुआ कि at times you will see windfall gains, at times you will see tapered revenue growth, or sometimes due to recession, the business is such that your earnings will be hampered quite a lot. So where there is question mark upon the very earnings or the cash inflows or the revenue of the business, it is obvious that you will find pressure and find tough to pay off your fixed interest burden. Right? It will add additional pressure upon you. So under circumstances where the project is expected to generate less stable earnings, less stable revenue, there's question mark over the cash inflow over the time. Sometimes you have a manifold cash inflow, sometimes you have tapered cash flow or slow cash inflow. Then you opt for a greater proportion of equity in your capital structure, and you try to avoid debts on the capital structure, because once you have limited cash inflow, low revenue, unstable earnings, if you have higher debt proportion on your capital structure, it will require regular and consistent cash outflow on account of interest, your fixed interest burden. Whether you have cash or not, it does not matter, right? So earnings play a very important role in deciding the mix of equity and debt in the capital structure. Am I clear, class?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
ठीक है, तो इसको हम लोग लिख लेते हैं. The higher the debt content in the capital structure, the higher the debt content in the capital structure of a company, comma, the higher will be the risk of variations in the expected earnings. expected earnings available to the equity shareholders. Full stop. If
Expected
returns
earnings.
to equity shareholders, expected earnings to equity shareholders, full stop. If the ROI or ROCE, ROI or ROCE, ROI का full form return on investment या ROCE का full form return on capital employed, exceeds the interest rate, exceeds the interest rate the shareholders get a higher return. Full stop. On the other hand,
Sir, sir, interest rate the shareholder.
shareholders, the shareholders will get higher return. The shareholders will get higher return. Full stop. On the other hand, if interest rate exceeds, if interest rate exceeds the return on investments, exceeds the return on investments, the shareholder may not get any return at all. The shareholders may not get any return at all. Next point is cost of capital. Next point है cost of capital. लिखिए. Cost of capital means the cost of raising the capital, from different sources of funds, full stop. It is the money paid for raising, the capital. Full stop. A business enterprise should generate enough revenue a business enterprise should generate enough revenue to meet its cost of capital
To
and finance in future growth. Finance its future growth. Full stop. The finance manager must consider the cost of each source of fund
Sir, the finance manager
must consider the source of each the cost of each source of funds must consider the cost of each source of funds while designing the capital structure of a company. Full stop. Next point, control. देखिए कंट्रोल इज ऑल्सो वेरी सिंपल. कंट्रोल का मतलब कंट्रोल किसके पास होता है?
Shareholder.
कंट्रोल शेयर होल्डर्स के पास होता है, विच इज वेरी गुड. सो what I'm trying to say is, and what you need to understand is the control over the ownership of the business. Control means ownership. Control over the ownership of the business lies in the hands of the equity shareholders. Now, if the capital structure has more of equity, and less of debt, what it implies? It implies that the number of shareholders are more. So once the number of shareholders increases, the control also gets diluted. But suppose if your business requires some funding and you don't want to dilute your control, you don't want anybody else or new shareholders in the business, then what will you do? You will opt for a greater proportion of debt, because debt is not the owner's capital. Debt is a liability wherein you get the money on payment of some periodic interest. Simple. And once the maturity is there, you need to pay off the debt amount, isn't it? So once the existing equity shareholders are of the opinion that they are not willing to part with the control or ownership of the business, then they will have more of debt component in the capital structure, and vice versa. If they have got no issue, even if the number of shareholders increase, then they will have funds through the issue of equity shares rather than the issue of debt. Am I clear, class?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Write down. The consideration of retaining control of the business. Is an important factor in capital structure.
The
consideration of retaining control of the business. The consideration of retaining control of the business. Is an important factor. In capital structure decision. Full stop. If the existing equity shareholders do not like to dilute the control, comma, they may prefer debt to equity. They may prefer debt to equity as former has former former has no voting rights. As former have no voting rights. Point number 5 है trading on equity. ये बड़ा अच्छा point है trading on equity का. Next point लिखिएगा trading on equity. ये होता क्या है? मैं ये आपसे शेयर करूं. देखिए होता क्या है इसमें कि how would you define trading on equity? It is very important. बहुत सारे लोग इसको financial leverage भी कहते हैं. सुनना ध्यान से क्योंकि leverage पूरा chapter हम लोगों को पढ़ना है. Trading on equity is also known as financial leverage by financial experts. Now, what is trading on equity? Prior to understanding trading on equity, we need to again recall ourselves of the fact that financial management's objective is to maximize the wealth of the shareholders. Maximize the wealth of the shareholders. To distribute more and more dividend among the shareholders. To earn more money or increase the EPS of the company so that the market price of the company also increases. This is how the wealth of the shareholders can be maximized. Now, what about trading on equity? If I were a business, if I were the management of a business, management of the company, and I'm quite certain and sure about the future revenue over the coming 5-10 years, I'm quite sure about the business model. I'm very much sure about the cash inflows. I have analyzed everything and I have come to a conclusion that over the next 10 years, my performance or the performance of my company will be quite sound. No issue as far as debt repayment is concerned, no issue as far as payment of interest is concerned, nothing of that sort. Now, I were to expand my business. The expansion of the business will require more investments. And now more investment will require finance. More investments will require what? Finance. Now I'm sure that I will be earning sufficient cash. Revenues will be good, stable, no issue. I will prefer to raise money through the issue of debt. Right? Now, once I will be preferring to raise money through debt, I will have to pay some interest. Suppose I'm going to raise debt on the payment of 8% interest per annum. I'm going to raise debt on the payment of 8% interest per annum. Company will raise the debt and I am ready to invest those debt into my business, from where my ROI is say 14% or say 15%. My return on investment is 15%. And how much do I need to pay as interest? I need to pay 8% as interest. By using the borrowed money, am I earning something for the business? If yes, how much?
6 to 7%.
7%, right? Because तुमसे मैंने कर्ज दिया, तुमको मैं 8% दे रहा हूँ, तुम्हारे पैसे को मैं जहाँ पे इन्वेस्ट कर रहा हूँ वहां से आई एम गेटिंग 15%. ठीक है, तो तुम्हारे ही पैसे से मैंने अपने बिजनेस में लगाया, मैं 15% कमा रहा हूँ, उसमें से 8% मैं तुमको दे रहा हूँ, तो 7% मेरा तो बचा ना। आई हैव अर्न 7%। क्या मैंने कैपिटल लगाया इसमें? नहीं लगाया, मैंने दूसरे से बोरो किया, दूसरे के पैसे से मैं 7% कमा रहा हूँ। तो this 7% increase will go on to add your profits, will go on to increase your profits. And increased profits will mean that you are paying more dividends, you are increasing the EPS, and ultimately benefiting the shareholders. What is trading on equity? Trading on equity means taking advantage of the borrowed funds to benefit the equity shareholders. इसी को कहते हैं ट्रेडिंग ऑन इक्विटी। तो आप जब कैपिटल स्ट्रक्चर डिजाइन करते हैं तो आपको बहुत स्पेसिफिकली होके सोचना पड़ेगा कि हम लोग किस तरीके से शेयर होल्डर्स के वेल्थ को मैक्सिमाइज कर पा रहे हैं, इन व्हाट वे वी आर मैक्सिमाइजिंग द वेल्थ ऑफ द शेयर होल्डर्स। एम आई क्लियर क्लास?
Yes, sir.
तो उसमें जब आप देखिए कैप ट्रेडिंग ऑन इक्विटी का भी फायदा आप तभी उठा पाएंगे जब आप स्टेबल रेवेन्यू की बात करते हैं, जब आपका आरओआई आपके इंटरेस्ट रेट से ज्यादा होगा, तभी आप ट्रेडिंग ऑन इक्विटी को कैपिटल स्ट्रक्चर में इनकलकेट करेंगे, उसको शामिल करेंगे। तो आज जो हम लोगों ने पढ़ा उसमें कहीं किसी को कोई डाउट है? एनीबॉडी?
No, sir.
No, sir. Clear.
ठीक है, तो आई एम स्टॉपिंग द लाइव स्ट्रीमिंग नाउ एंड प्लीज वेट फॉर द अटेंडेंस।